She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Ash streaked her cheeks. Mud clung to the hem of her torn dress, and two younger boys clung to her sides like saplings caught in a storm. Yet when the auctioneer shoved her forward onto the platform, the girl didn't cry, her face didn't flinch. She just stared out at the crowd with eyes that had lived too many lifetimes for a child of 8. From the edge of the square, Magnolia Voss felt something inside her chest give way, a quiet splintering, the kind that doesn't bleed but changes you all the same. The Friday market buzzed with its usual din of cattle calls and shouted bids, but this auction wasn't about livestock or old plows. No, today they were selling off human souls, 3 children who stood on splintered wood like discarded dolls, their faces streaked with dirt and something darker still. The auctioneer's voice bellowed across the crowd, cruel and callous, starting. Bid for all $320. They can work, earn their keep. Magnolia's weathered fingers curled tight around her leather purse. She hadn't come to town for this, just supplies, flour, coffee, maybe a bolt of fabric if the price was right. Her ranch had been too quiet since Samuel died, too full of echoes, of empty chairs and phantom laughter. The last thing she needed was more ghosts walking her halls. But something about the way that little girl spread her arms in front of her brothers, shielding them with a frame that looked ready to break, pulled Magnolia back through time, back to when she was that girl once. Desperate and defiant. 25. Came a coarse voice from the crowd. She turned and found herself staring at Jake Morrison, a man known more for bruises than wages, a man who didn't hire help so much as crush them beneath his heel. Her stomach churned. The girl's gaze slid across the square and locked with Magnolia's. Just a flicker, just a second, but it was enough. Those weren't the eyes of a child. They were the eyes of someone who had buried too much, endured too long. Her lips moved, silently, forming words Magnolia couldn't read from where she stood. 30. Morrison barked again, stepping forward with a gleam in his eye that made Magnolia feel sick. Her heart thundered. She thought of Samuel, of that sun-baked afternoon by his grave, the wind hot and bitter in her mouth, and the promise she'd whispered into the dirt. Live again. Find something worth holding onto. Maybe this was it. Maybe they weren't the ones being rescued after all. 50. The number came out before she even realized it had formed on her tongue. Her voice sliced through the crowd like a blade. Heads turned. Whispers followed. Widow Voss, in her plain brown dress and sun-creased face, standing tall beneath a brimmed hat that had seen too many summers. Morrison's expression darkened, but Magnolia stepped forward, drawing the crumpled bills from her purse with shaking fingers. The gavel cracked like thunder. Sold to Mrs. Voss. She walked slowly toward the platform as the oldest girl whispered to the boys, her voice like a wind only they could hear. Magnolia knelt to meet her eyes. What's your name, child? The girl hesitated, then glanced at her brothers and spoke, her voice low, steady, and laced with history. Clementine Ross, ma'am. My daddy used to tell us stories about a lady named Magnolia. Said she lived on a ranch with the kindest man in the territory. Magnolia froze. A tremor passed through her. Clementine reached into the tattered folds of her dress and pulled out a small object. The brass button in her palm was dulled with time, its edges softened by years of fingers holding it close, but the initials engraved. Into the metal made Magnolia's breath catch. SV. Samuel Voss. She had sewn that button herself onto the vest Samuel wore the day they were wed. He'd called it his lucky charm. Where did you get this? Clementine's hand curled protectively around it. My daddy gave it to me before he died. Said it belonged to the man who saved his life during the Indian raids 5 years ago. Said Samuel Voss was the bravest man he ever met. Magnolia's heart pounded. Samuel had never spoken about the raids, never explained the scar that cut across his shoulder, or why he sometimes woke in the night, breathless, drenched in cold sweat. Every time she'd asked, he'd gone silent. What was your daddy's name? Thomas Ross. Clementine said softly. He was a scout for the army. He told me if anything ever happened to him, I should find Samuel Voss. That Samuel would take care of us. The name rang through her like a church bell. Samuel had mentioned Thomas once, long ago, calling him a good man who'd deserved better than what life handed him. Where's he now? She asked, already knowing. Fever took him last month, Clementine whispered. We were living in the old mining camp. Then the company men came and said we had to leave. That's when they brought us here. The smallest boy tugged at his sister's dress. Clemmy, is this the angel lady Daddy told us about? The one with yellow hair and the best apple pie in the territory? Magnolia's hand rose unconsciously to her graying blonde bun. Yellow hair, apple pie. Details only someone close to Samuel would have known. But why? Why had he shared these things with a man she'd never met? As they made their way to the wagon, Clementine walked beside her. Mrs. Voss, she said, Daddy said your husband carried a secret, a promise he couldn't keep. The youngest boy, exhausted, stumbled. Magnolia lifted him easily into her arms, shocked by how light he was, skin and bone, barely there. As she tucked him into the wagon bed, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Round his wrist was a bracelet, braided leather, wooden beads, a design she'd seen before, tucked in a box beneath her marriage bed. A box Samuel had always told her not to open, and now the past had found its way to her doorstep. At the ranch, the house felt smaller with 3 children gathered at her kitchen table. Magnolia sliced cold beef and tore bread while Clementine's eyes moved over the walls and furniture, as if searching for pieces of a puzzle only she knew. That's him, isn't it? She asked, pointing to the wedding photograph on the mantel. Daddy said he had kind eyes. A scar, too, right here. She touched her shoulder. The scar was barely visible, hidden under Samuel's shirt. Few knew it existed. Yes, Magnolia said. That's Samuel. The boy Boone lifted his gaze. Daddy said Mr. Samuel promised to watch over us if anything happened. Said he owed Daddy a debt that couldn't be repaid. Samuel, who never owed anyone, who lived modest and gave freely. What debt? What kind of debt? Clementine's face twisted. Daddy never told us everything. Just that, during the raids, someone had to die so others could live. And Mr. Samuel chose him, instead of someone else. Instead of who? He wouldn't say. But it made him sad every time he talked about it. Zeke was rifling through drawers now, unbothered, too young to understand the weight filling the room. Magnolia's thoughts whirled. Daddy said there might be letters, Clementine said. He said Samuel wrote them, but never sent them. Before Magnolia could answer, Zeke's voice echoed down the hallway. Clemmy, I found the box. It's the one Daddy told us about. They found him cross-legged on the floor, beside the cedar box she'd never opened. Inside were Samuel's medals, his cavalry badge, and a small oil painting. A dark-haired woman laughing, a baby in her arms. On the back, written in Samuel's careful hand, Elizabeth and Thomas Jr. never forgotten. Clementine opened a folded letter and read aloud, My dearest Elizabeth, I pray this letter finds you and the baby safe. I'm sorry I couldn't save him. I had to choose. I chose your husband over your boy. I'll carry this burden to my grave. The letter slipped from her fingers. Magnolia stared at the children, realization pressing into her ribs like a weight. These weren't just orphans. These were the living remnants of a man Samuel had once saved, a man he'd once betrayed, a man whose name had lived in their house. All along, Mrs. Voss, Boone said, his voice cracking. Why did your husband let our baby brother die? Before she could answer, hoofbeats thundered down the lane. Through the window, 3 riders approached, Jake Morrison leading. A fist pounded against the door. Magnolia Voss, I know you're in there. You had no right bidding on those children. She didn't open it. The auction was fair, Jake. I paid what was asked. $50 for 3 brats. You've lost your damn mind. They need work, not pity. Through the window, she saw the Garrett brothers dismount. Trouble followed them like shadows. Her rifle hung above the hearth, but 3 children stood behind her now. She couldn't risk a fight. The law says they're mine. The law ain't on your side. He laughed bitterly. Walsh is up north, won't be back for days. That leaves just you and me. Clementine tugged Magnolia's skirt. There's another way out. Root cellar. Daddy said always know the exits. But before she could move, wood splintered. The back door burst open. Morrison stepped into the kitchen. Calm and smiling. I'll pay your $50, even throw in $10 for your trouble. but the kids are mine. You'll touch none of them. Everything's for sale," he said, his gaze roaming, lingering. "And maybe I want more than just the children." Magnolia felt bile rise. She knew what kind of man he was, the whispers that clung to his name. She stepped in front of the children. "Get out." "I don't think so." He lunged for Clementine, but Magnolia caught his wrist. He struck her hard. The room spun. She crashed into the table. The children screamed. Then another presence. A tall figure at the back door, weathered, gray-haired, a rifle steady in his hands, a star pinned to his vest. "Step away." Morrison froze. "Sheriff Walsh." Magnolia breathed. "Got word of trouble," Walsh said evenly. "Didn't expect to find you breaking into a widow's home, Jake." "She stole my property." "No, she paid. Fair and square. She had no right." "She had every right. What she didn't have was you laying hands on her." Walsh's voice dropped, steel beneath the calm. "Boys, get out." Now, the Garretts backed away, pale. "This ain't over," Morrison hissed. "There's something strange here. A lonely woman suddenly playing mother. It doesn't have to make sense to you," Walsh said. "This is her house, her land, her right." When they were gone, Walsh turned back, his voice softer. "You'll want something cold for that bruise." Magnolia pressed the cloth to her face. The pain was real, but the ache in her chest went deeper. "How did you know to come?" she asked, and in the stillness that followed, the children reached for her hands as if she were already theirs. "I wasn't sure what was going on," Walsh said, brushing dust from his coat. "But I was heading back from North County when I ran into Pete Williams." He mentioned seeing Morrison and the Garrett boys riding toward your place looking mighty purposeful. Figured that spelled trouble. He knelt, the tough lines of his face softening as he looked into the wide eyes of the three children huddled behind Magnolia. "You little ones, all right. Must have been pretty scary." Clementine, always the brave one, stepped forward and placed a protective hand on her brother's shoulders. "We're fine, sir. Mrs. Voss took good care of us." "I'm sure she did." The sheriff rose, turning his attention to Magnolia. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what made you decide to bid on these children? Folks in town are wondering. You never seemed the type." Magnolia glanced down at the children, three pairs of eyes watching her with a mix of fear and hope that clutched at her chest. How could she explain what even she didn't fully understand? How could she tell him about the letters beneath her bed, about Samuel's hidden past, or the terrible choice he had made long ago that bound her fate to these children forever? "Sometimes," she said quietly, "you see something that needs doing, and you just do it. These children needed a home. I had room." Walsh nodded slowly, the weight of her words not lost on him. "Well, Morrison won't be bothering you again anytime soon. But if he does, you send for me right away. And Mrs. Voss." He paused at the door. "You might want to think about getting a dog. Good protection, especially for a woman living alone." After the sheriff's departure, the house settled into a heavy hush. The children huddled together on the settee, silent and stunned. Magnolia's hands trembled as she prepared tea, the day's fear and tension still pulsing in her veins. "Mrs. Voss?" Clementine's voice was soft, uncertain. Magnolia turned. "Yes, sweetheart. Are you sorry you bought us, because of all the trouble?" Setting down her teacup, Magnolia knelt before them and took Clementine's hands in hers. "The only thing I'm sorry about is that it took so long for you to find your way here." She meant it, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew their troubles were far from over. Morrison's parting glare still haunted her, and the box of unsent letters tucked beneath her bed whispered secrets that had yet to come to light. Samuel's past had reached beyond the grave to change everything, and Magnolia didn't yet know what price would come with that inheritance. Later that night, after the children had drifted into uneasy sleep, Magnolia sat at her kitchen table by flickering candlelight. The wooden box lay open before her, its contents arranged in careful order. Letters Samuel had written but never sent. They painted a picture of a man she both loved and barely recognized. The earliest dated back 5 years, during the time of the Apache raids, days filled with dust, blood, and impossible choices. In one letter, written 3 days after the fighting ceased, Samuel's handwriting trembled with guilt. I replay that moment every night. Thomas was down, 3 arrows in his side. Your boy was trapped under the wagon, crying for his mama. I could only save one. God help me, I pulled Thomas free. I thought he had a future still. I thought he could have more children, be a husband to you again. But I was wrong. Magnolia's hands shook as she read. Samuel had chosen to save Thomas Ross, leaving the baby beneath the wagon. By the time he returned, Apache warriors had come and gone. The child was gone. Elizabeth Ross, broken by grief, passed away 6 months later. Thomas raised the remaining children Clementine, and the 2 boys dash alone. Another letter, written 2 years later, blood sorrow. Thomas doesn't speak to me, though he sends word that he doesn't blame me. But I see it every time I look into his eyes, that question, why not his son first? And how do I answer him? I thought he could survive the loss. I thought wrong. The final letter, dated just months before Samuel's death, held a quiet farewell. My cough worsens by the day. Magnolia fusses over me like I'll shatter. I think she knows I won't see another winter. Thomas, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I never found the strength to send these letters. But know this, Magnolia is good. If something happens to your children, she'll love them like her own. That's how I try to settle the debt I owe you. A soft shuffle broke the silence. Magnolia looked up to find Clementine standing in the doorway, her nightgown glowing faintly in the candlelight. Can't sleep? Magnolia asked. I heard you crying, the girl said gently, stepping closer. Magnolia wiped her eyes. Your father was a good man, Clementine. So was my Samuel. Even if they made a terrible choice, Daddy said it wasn't a terrible choice. Clementine replied as she climbed onto a chair beside her. He said, Mr. Samuel did what he thought was right, that the worst thing would have been trying to save both, and losing both. The wisdom in the child's voice struck Magnolia deeply. How do you know so much about forgiveness? Daddy taught. He said, carrying anger is like holding hot coals. It burns you more than anyone else. The child reached for one of the letters, though she couldn't read it. Do you think Mr. Samuel would be happy that we found you? Magnolia pulled her into her lap, her heart full. I think he'd be relieved. I think he could finally rest. You think we did the right thing? I think you did exactly the right thing. But in her heart, Magnolia knew Samuel's story wasn't over. Thomas Ross had been a scout one who'd made enemies, and Morrison was out there still, licking his wounds and plotting his next move. The debts Samuel tried to settle with kindness, and words might still come due with interest. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Magnolia was hanging laundry in the sun-drenched yard when a wagon approached. Mrs. Henderson sat beside Dr. Martin, with a sharp-faced woman in dark traveling clothes. Magnolia's heart sank. Mrs. Voss, Dr. Martin called. Dismounting, we need a word about the children. This is Mrs. Catherine Whitmore, he added. Territorial Children's Services. There have been concerns. The children froze on the porch, fear written plainly across their faces. They'd seen this before official visits that rarely ended well. Who raised these concerns? Magnolia asked, though she knew the answer. Mr. Morrison. Mrs. Whitmore replied crisply. He claims the auction was irregular, and that you are unfit due to widowhood and financial instability. My finances are none of Jake Morrison's concern, Magnolia replied, steel in her voice. And my ability to care for children doesn't depend on whether or not I have a husband. Mrs. Henderson interjected softly. No one doubts your heart, Magnolia. But 3 children is a lot for anyone. Mrs. Whitmore performed her inspection. With cold efficiency, she scrutinized beds, meals, and their routine, noting everything in her ledger. Finally, she said, the children appear well cared for. But there are other factors. She asked about Magnolia's income, her plans for education, religion, discipline. Magnolia answered each with quiet pride. Then came the final blow. Mr. Morrison has offered to take the children and ensure they receive proper training and education. He's also offered financial compensation for your trouble. They aren't for sale. Magnolia snapped. They're human beings. They've already lost too much. At that moment, Clementine stepped forward, her voice calm but full of quiet strength. "May I say something, ma'am?" Mrs. Whitmore blinked. "Yes, child. My daddy said when grown-ups talk about what's best for kids, they usually mean what's easiest for them. He said the best place for children is with people who want them not for what they can do, but for who they are." Mrs. Whitmore paused mid-note. "And do you believe Mrs. Voss wants you for yourselves?" "Yes, ma'am. She bought us when she didn't have to. She protected us when it would have been easier to give us up. She cries over our baby brother even though she never met him." Dr. Martin nodded. "That speaks volumes." Before anyone could respond, hooves thundered down the road. Morrison appeared with two rough-looking men. "Well," he drawled, dismounting, "looks like the whole committee's here." But he hadn't counted on Sheriff Walsh, who rode in behind him carrying a sealed document. "Mrs. Whitmore, Doctor." "Martin," Walsh greeted them. "Jake, I told you to leave her alone. This came in on the morning stage." He opened the document. Turns out, Thomas Ross filed guardianship papers before his death, naming Magnolia Voss as guardian of his children. The yard went still. "That's a lie," Morrison shouted. "How could he know her?" "Doesn't matter." Walsh said. "He did. Witnessed by a territorial judge." Mrs. Whitmore examined the papers. "They appear authentic." Clementine looked up. "How did Daddy know to do that?" Walsh smiled gently. "Your father and Samuel had been writing for months. He forgave him, and he trusted Magnolia." Turning to Morrison, the sheriff's face hardened. "These children are where they belong. You interfere again, and it'll be harassment." Morrison left in fury, but the battle was done. That evening, as Magnolia tucked Zeke in, he asked sleepily, "Are we really staying?" "As long as you want to," she whispered. "Even when we're grown and have kids of our own, even then." As she closed their door, Magnolia realized the greatest gift Samuel had left her wasn't the children themselves. It was the chance to rebuild together, to heal wounds too long ignored, to become the family each of them had lost. And out under the stars, on a ranch no longer silent, three spirits finally found peace.